Welcome to Wales Today. Our top story, Rayad Khan, a jihadist from Cardiff, was killed by an RAF drone strike in Syria. The Prime Minister told MPs Khan was planning terrorist attacks in the UK.
Rayad Khan was killed in a precision airstrike carried out on the 21st of August by an RAF remotely piloted aircraft while he was travelling in a vehicle in the area of Raqqa in Syria.
It's the first time an RAF drone has been used to attack a British national in a country in which it's not at war. Five onshore wind farms in Powys are rejected by the UK government, with one approved, but a big question mark hangs over that. 34 passengers involved in this coach crash in Switzerland arrived back home in Wales, 5 still being treated at Swiss hospitals. And that goalless draw means Wales football fans have to wait another month to see if they'll get to the European Championships in France. Hello, good evening. The Cardiff jihadist Rayad Khan, who joined a group in Syria, was killed by the RAF in a targeted drone airstrike in the country. The Prime Minister David Cameron told MPs Khan was plotting barbaric attacks on UK soil. He said the threat posed made the RAF attack an act of self-defence, which was entirely lawful, which had been approved by the government's most senior legal officer, the Attorney General.
In recent weeks, it's been reported that 2 ISIL fighters of British nationality who had been plotting attacks against the UK and other countries have been killed in airstrikes. Both Junaid Hussain and Rayad Khan were British nationals based in Syria who were involved in actively recruiting ISIL sympathisers and seeking to orchestrate specific and barbaric attacks against the West, including directing a number of planned terrorist attacks right here in Britain, such as plots to attack high-profile public commemorations, including those taking place this summer. We should be under no illusion their intention was the murder of British citizens. So on this occasion, we ourselves took action. Today, I can inform the House that in an act of self-defence and after meticulous planning, Rayad Khan was killed in a precision airstrike carried out on the 21st of August by an RAF remotely piloted aircraft while he was travelling in a vehicle in the area of Raqqa in Syria. In addition to Rayad Khan, who was the target of the strike, 2 ISIL associates were also killed, one of whom, Ruhul Amin, has been identified as a UK national. They were ISIL fighters, and I can confirm there were no civilian casualties. Mr. Speaker, we took this action because there was no alternative. In this area, there's no government we can work with. We have no military on the ground to detain those preparing plots. And there was nothing to suggest that Rayad Khan would ever leave Syria or desist from his desire to murder us at home. So we had no way of preventing his planned attacks on our country without taking direct action.
The Prime Minister talking earlier. Well, this is the first time a drone has been used to attack a British national in a country in which it's not at war. Rayad Khan was travelling in a vehicle in the Raqqa area of the country when he was killed alongside another IS fighter from the UK. But how did the student from Cardiff become the target of what David Cameron called a precision airstrike by British forces? Caroline Evans reports.
Born in Penarth, schooled in Cardiff, Rayad Khan left Wales in 2013, telling his family he was going to Birmingham for an Islamic conference. It was last June that he reappeared, by now a fighter for the so-called Islamic State. He was featured on this recruitment video for IS. His family later spoke of their shock and said he'd been brainwashed. Today, the Prime Minister said he was planning attacks here in Britain.
My first duty as Prime Minister is to keep the British people safe. That is what I will always do. There was a terrorist directing murder on our streets and no other means to stop him. This government does not for one moment take these decisions lightly. But I'm not prepared to stand here in the aftermath of a terrorist attack on our streets and have to explain to the House why I did not take the chance to prevent it when I could have done.
There had been reports in July that Rayad Khan had died in a missile attack. That proved false. His death was first announced in this mosque in Cardiff last Wednesday. They told me his father had rung the imam to ask for prayers to be said for him, and this had been done. The secretary said they didn't know him here. So how did this Cardiff boy, who when interviewed as a teenager said he wanted to become the first Asian Prime Minister, come to be regarded as such a threat to our national security that the government decided it had to stop him in an act of self-defence? Mohammed Islam, who knows Rayad Khan's family, said this is devastating news for the Muslim community in the city, who will want many questions answered now.
As a member of community, as a former councillor, I would like to hear and I would like to call for investigations and see the truth of this order and this incident.
Tonight, Muslim leaders in Cardiff described the revelation as catastrophic and urged the authorities to seek out people who pose a threat here.
He died and we knew about it, but this extra bit of information which the Prime Minister revealed today was a great shock and surprise, because to expect somebody sitting there and being able to do something here is quite catastrophic and quite worrying, to be honest. And I hope the authorities will look into it and find if any culprits are here who are going to perpetrate this incident.
Sat next to Rayad Khan in that video was another Cardiff man, Nasser Muthana. His family have previously said they are heartbroken. In Parliament, their MP called on the Prime Minister to pour more resources into protecting young people from radicalisation.
Clearly, the Prime Minister and his ministers have difficult decisions to take in circumstances when there is a threat to this country. Would he meet with myself and the member for Cardiff West to discuss the circumstances and the nature of what's happened, but also, most importantly, to discuss what we can do better together to tackle the extremists who are trying to recruit those individuals from our own shores to prevent further young people from getting involved with this barbarous organisation.
It is the first time an RAF drone has been used to attack a British national in a country in which it is not at war. The Prime Minister said today there was no choice.
Caroline Evans reporting. Well, let's go to Westminster now, where the Prime Minister made that statement on the death of Rayad Khan. Our parliamentary correspondent David Cornock is there for us tonight. David.
Jamie, there was a real sense of shock in the House of Commons as the Prime Minister unveiled details of that drone strike. Among the MPs watching and questioning him, Kevin Brennan, who was Rayad Khan's MP in Cardiff West. Kevin Brennan, the Prime Minister there said there was no alternative, there was no choice.
Well, it's probably inevitable that somebody like Rayad Khan travelling out to fight for so-called Islamic State in Syria is going to be killed, and that's a tragedy for his family who tried to prevent him from going out there. However, it does raise a number of questions. I think this is probably the first time that the British government has said that it has targeted a UK citizen in this way, and it's justified that by saying that he constituted a direct threat to Britain, and there'll inevitably be questions about exactly what that threat was.
Downing Street talk of a direct threat in terms of threatening commemorations that were taking place in this country over the summer and this year.
Yes, that was brought into the statement, although it wasn't made exactly clear what the nature of the involvement of Rayad Khan was that led to this decision that he constituted a direct threat himself, personally, to the United Kingdom, which justified, as I say, this highly unusual, if not unprecedented, drone strike by the government in Syria against a UK citizen. Of course, the government doesn't have parliamentary authority to conduct military operations in Syria, but this was done under a different doctrine of self-defence, so there will inevitably be questions. And I think this has to be considered by the Defence and Security Committee of the House of Commons and by the independent officer for terrorism, which the government have appointed.
Because the Prime Minister says it was entirely lawful under this doctrine of self-defence.
That is what the government have said, and of course they have to justify that statement, because anything the government does has to be legal. They're reporting it to the United Nations, for example. Questions will therefore need to be asked about exactly the details of what this was about.
Kevin Brennan, thank you very much indeed. From Westminster, back to you, Jamie.
David, thank you. Jacqueline Sutherland is an expert on the recruiting tactics of radical Islamist groups, and we can talk to her now. Jacqueline Sutherland, how does someone go from being a teenager in Cardiff to being targeted in an RAF drone strike in Syria?
Yes, Jamie, that is certainly the question on everyone's mind today. I think really what we are seeing is fundamentally an ISIS phenomenon, where in the aftermath of 9/11, we were not seeing Welsh citizens being radicalized by al-Qaeda and going over and joining al-Qaeda, whereas now with ISIS, where they seem to have this global brand appeal that is really permeating the consciousness of a lot of different Westerners that are traveling over to Syria and Iraq and joining ISIS. And so I think we are basically seeing that unfold right now with what has happened. It's just the cycle of violence and the cycle of radicalization continuing, and people really buying into this brand that they are espousing.
Which leads on to the question, what should organisations like the police and others be doing to make sure that young Welsh people do not travel to Syria?
That is definitely a very difficult question, and something that I know Prime Minister Cameron is working to address, because also, unlike al-Qaeda, we are seeing not any sort of a trend in demographics, but we are seeing young men go over, we are seeing women, we are seeing entire families making very risky journeys to go overseas and join this organization. So I think really it boils down to a question of identity and figuring out some different programs and strategic communication policies that can really make these people feel a sense of identity and ownership with their UK citizenship, as opposed to being radicalized and as opposed to being vulnerable to ISIS propaganda.
Could Rayad Khan's death perhaps encourage other young people to join groups like so-called Islamic State?
I think that is the difficulty, where we definitely have to be very, very careful with how we are crafting this headline, because to us, to the Western world, it is being communicated as this death by drone strike. But you have to think that in ISIS propaganda and throughout the Middle East, the possibility that the headline is actually reading that this young man was a martyr and died for jihad and died for Allah. And so we definitely have to be very cognizant that that headline is probably circulating in those communities, and being able to craft something that can preempt and deter that and basically point out the fallacies within it.
Jacqueline Sutherland, thank you.
Thank you.
Now the